Hello, scholars. Mr. Long here. Today, we're going to wrap up our lesson on the executive branch by talking about some of the ways the government is financed, especially with what the government spends its money on. So first slide here, we have the 2019 federal budget broken up. If you want to take a quick pause to go over all the little sub-bullets here on the graphic, go ahead. Adjust my camera a little bit. So when we're looking at spending, the chapter did talk about mandatory spending and discretionary spending. So quick review, mandatory spending, this is government spending that the government is contractually obligated to spend money on. Here on the graphic here on the pie chart, these are things like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, that if you are enrolled in programs like these, you expect to receive this money from the government. So the government can't take money away from these programs without violating contracts with the recipients of this money. We also have discretionary spending. These are funds that are used on things that, you don't really have to spend the money on. The biggest example is defense. So paying for the different branches of the military, paying for bases, equipment for the military training. You also have medical expenses for current service members, as well as service members who were injured in the line of duty and then get compensation for that. So there's a huge pot that goes into the defense budget. So this budget has $676 billion. Some stuff that I was reading put like veterans benefits outside of that in non-defense. And I even think here in this graphic here, let me see if I can get that really tiny. Yeah, somewhere around there. We have veterans benefits. So this is, they're not active duty service members now, but because they did serve in the defense, they are still receiving benefits later on. And so that gets pulled into a different pot. But if you combine all these things together involving the military, it can get upwards of about $1 trillion. So a lot of money going into the United States military. As for revenues, where money is coming from, it's pretty much all about taxes, either payroll taxes for, whenever you have a job. So for those of you, my high school seniors who have jobs, if you look at your pay stub, you'll see money coming out of it for stuff like Social Security or unemployment insurance, different programs like that you really don't have a say. So as the payroll comes out, it's taken from you. Individual income taxes, so you also get taxed on what your take-home pay is. Corporate income taxes, so when the big corporations, when they make a profit, a percentage of that needs to go to the government to help fund different programs, which goes into the outlays of the spending. So we have some truly massive numbers when we're dealing with billions and trillions of dollars. And so one thing that I've noticed as a teacher is that sometimes those numbers can kind of get lost on most people, where you just hear the word trillion, you're like, okay, cool, that's like a lot of money. But when we're talking about these trillions of dollars, is there a way that we can quantify it? So Jeff Bezos, he's like the founder of Amazon. He just stepped down as their CEO. He's considered one of the wealthiest people in the world right now. He has a net worth of about $184 billion. So if you were piling up the net worth of different clones of Jeffrey Bezos, who all are worth $184 billion, it would still take 24 of the richest man in the world to equal how much the federal government spent roughly in 2019. So if that helps, good. Another way of looking at it is the iPhone X, which the lowest on the low end was about $1,000. So to spend $4.4 trillion, again, the output over here, the outlay, you would require 4.4 billion iPhone X's just to equal federal spending. If you gave every United States citizen, so divided up those 4.4 billion among every citizen, regardless of age in the United States, each American would receive 12 iPhone X's, and that just represent how much represents how much money the federal government spends every year. So hopefully that helps put that in context, because this is kind of the scope and scale, the massive scope that we're talking about with federal budgets. Here's a quick slide on U.S. government debt as a percentage of gross domestic product. For those of you that may not remember from economics class, gross domestic product, that's the total value of all goods and services created in the country in a given year. So what percentage of the wealth is being spent by the government, spanning most of our history here. So 1790, shortly after the U.S. Constitution was ratified, all the way up through roughly 2015 or so, right before President Trump was elected. So in the very beginning, we had a very large debt as a result of the American Revolution. It was crazy expensive for a poor little backwater of a nation. And then where the debt peaks throughout our history, where you can see the circle and the war, that would be where the debt kind of skyrockets temporarily, how the U.S. government is taking on this debt to pay off pretty much what it's spending on the military or whatever it may be. And it's just interesting to note that when we're looking at government deficit and government debt, a huge chunk of this, historically speaking, comes from waging wars and then maintaining the conflict for ever long as it needs to be. So a couple examples, obviously the fallout from the American Revolution started us off really high, started to pay that off, debt went down, War of 1812 brought it back up, Civil War brought it back up, World War I, Great Depression, then World War II, where we were spending more money every year for a year or two during the peak than the country as a whole was effectively worth in regards to products and services. So I'm gonna try to draw a really straight line. So this is like 100%. So like that's all the money that everyone makes in services and goods in a year. And during World War II, we were just throwing money around with the military and giving money to the Soviet Union and the British and our allies in China to help defeat the Axis powers. So ridiculous amounts of money being spent during that time period. Fortunately for us in the modern day, at least before COVID, we don't really know what the long-term consequences of spending is going to be in regards to COVID, but it's probably going to be pretty ugly. Fortunately for us, at least pre-COVID, World War II was the high water mark in government spending, where we were spending more money than we were making every year, which again, if you take economics, is usually a pretty bad way to go through life. You know, you make $50,000 at your job and you spend $70,000 every year, you probably need to, take a break from eating steak and maybe have some ramen for a little while. Another peak we have as well, coming right around here. It's not labeled on the map. That's roughly 2000. That's a really awful line, but that's going to be the global war on terror, where we see this large upswing in debt as a result of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and maintaining an elevated military presence in countries around the globe. Just now I mentioned COVID and some of the impact that may have on government spending. As we've been talking about in current events, we've been looking at various COVID stimulus packages for private citizens and businesses, trying to help keep them afloat during the pandemic. And one of the things that economists and politicians are worried about is the way COVID is going to impact our revenue. So where under a normal year, individual income taxes, how much money, Joe Schmo down the street makes working at the gas station or the restaurant or at the hospital, whatever that may be, a percentage of that goes to the government. Well, if people aren't spending money and people aren't going to work and there's a lot of unemployment, there's less income taxes being paid, which is then going to impact how much money the government is able to spend, which means we further and further the debt as emphasized in this graphic. So as we move forward through this COVID pandemic and the way hopefully things will change for the better, keep an eye on current events and the political arena, because I'm sure there's going to be a litany of discussions going on about how much money is coming in and then what we can actually afford to do, or do we take on more debt to try to keep things moving? Third image I have for you guys today, this is the amount of money being spent every year by various politicians, in this case, presidents. So blue colors here represent the Democratic Party, and the red lines represent Republican parties, presidents. And the reason I wanted to bring this up here is that for, as long as there's been debt in this country, people have wanted and debated about lowering the debt, about lowering how much money the government spends, maybe cutting money from different programs or shifting priorities to save money and not go further and further into debt. However, at least over the last, from 1945 on this graphic to 2013, so that's like 60 years roughly, almost 70 years, the presidents have consistently spent more money than their predecessor did, with a minor bump there between George W. Bush and Obama, where it did go down a little bit. But in general, you have this steady increase. And there are a variety of reasons for this, but the biggest one is lowering government spending is poor politics. It's poor business. It's not a good way to make friends, because the money the government is spending goes into so many different pockets. Think about, federal programs. So if you want to cut back on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, there are American citizens in need that benefit from these programs, and they're not going to be very happy if you take away their benefits. In particular, you can look at elderly Americans, those that benefit from Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security once they reach retirement age. Well, they're the most reliable voting bloc. And when we talk about elections later on, we're going to analyze some of the ways American voters vote and how that impacts different policies. Well, a good way to lose an election is to upset the older American voting bloc by taking away their benefits, and then they're not going to vote for you because you took away the money that they were relying on. We can also look at jobs, right? So the federal government is spending money on contractors and different programs and their employees. If you cut, let's say we were to take $10 billion away from the Postal Service, right? Well, that money is going to have to come from somewhere, which means layoffs and pay decreases. And if you're a postal worker or your family relies on the income of a postal worker, you're going to be pretty upset with the president that effectively cut their budget, and now either mom and dad aren't making as much as they used to, which might make things more challenging, or they don't have a job at all because they were laid off. And so again, cutting spending is a good way for politicians to make enemies, which is why consistently politicians don't do that. They continually spend more, not a huge increase. It's a pretty gradual incline, as you can see from the graphic, but they typically spend more because they want to, hey, I'm the president now, I'm going to give you a little bit of pay raise, right? Let's pay the troops a little bit more. People can typically get on board with that. Let's increase the payout for senior citizens because they worked really hard to put into that. So let's make sure that they have enough money to get by. Great. Americans are typically going to like that. Let's start a new program to give more medical aid to families in rural areas. Well, the money has to come from somewhere, but the rural Americans are going to be like, yeah, that's great. Like, you're helping us out. And so just over time, more and more spending takes place as politicians are trying to make friends and secure their job by winning over their constituents. So the issue of government spending, if you look at the trends, it's not really a red versus blue thing. This is a human condition. It's a democratic condition because politicians want to be seen favorable by their voters, and one way to do that is to give them money or jobs or programs, which has to come from somewhere. Cool. I think that's all I want to talk about with this one. So just some food for thought. So to wrap up for today, hopefully I kept this one pretty short. There was some good information in the textbook that I didn't want to just repeat, so I wanted to come at some different angles and give you some different graphics. But here are a couple questions I want you to mull over and submit to me on Canvas. One, which of the expenses in the outlays pie chart on the federal budget in 2019 graphic do you think is the least necessary expense and why? So this is going to be a tough one because they're all important. But I want you to go back to that first graphic I showed you, so feel free to go back in the video and pause it. You can probably also Google that name, the federal budget in 2019, and maybe find on Google Images. But of all the expenses going into that, see if you can figure out which one, if you were president, if you had to cut money to one of these programs, which one would it be and why? Second question, how does military conflicts increase government spending throughout U.S. history? We talked about some examples, things to think about. You got to pay the troops, you got to feed the troops, you got to supply the troops, you have to transport the troops, you have to pay for wounded service members, you have to pay for the retirement pension for those that serve their career. So a variety of ways you can talk, so a variety of things that you can talk about and why military conflict jacks up how much money the government is spending. Finally, why do you think neither Republican or Democrat presidents in the modern era have effectively cut federal spending? Talked about that on the previous slide. Feel free to go back, poke around, see what kind of ideas you are attracted to. Feel free to also Google other stuff. There's a bunch of other things out there for you to explore. I'm just trying to give you some of the rough notes to get you guys started. Whew, that was pretty solid. Got through that a lot quicker than I thought I was, which is a good thing. We are concise and to the point, hopefully, and I'm not droning on and on. Speaking of droning on and on, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. This video will hopefully help get you moving in the right direction. Make sure you guys are reading the textbook where some more of the specifics can be found. Answer your questions on Canvas. And if you have any specific questions, save it for me to ask in class, or you can email it to me or message me on Canvas, and I will take care of whatever questions or concerns you may have. So other than that, I'm going to sign off. I'll see you guys in class. Mr. Long, over and out.